Hi, how are you? Oh, that does not sound good at all. How are you? There you go. Now you sound like some people who want to make sexual freedom real. So, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for having me here. It's really an honor to be here with you, and I want to especially extend gratitude to the folks who helped to organize and plan this conference. It is not easy work, so let's just give them a round of applause, please. Anybody who's ever put on a big event, hell, anybody who's ever put on a dinner party knows that it is not easy to plan, let alone an entire conference, so thank you. And I also want to extend gratitude for all of the people who have made this moment possible, including the people who built and care for this building, the people who sweep the floors and clean the toilets and take out the trash and do all of the other unseen labor that helps our fast-paced life be able to happen, that we don't think about often enough. Yes. I hope when you see them, you say thank you, you make eye contact, you treat them like human beings. I want to honor all of the indigenous people upon whose land we are on and the people who have been displaced from this land as well. We can never forget that most of us here are settlers on stolen land, even as we organize for freedom and liberation upon it. I want to say that I am deeply honored to have my work recognized this weekend. For me, this work is heart work, and is work that I feel like spills out of me. It's my passion, and I think about it as a manifestation of living into my purpose. So I know that it's one of the reasons why I'm here on this planet. So thank you very, very much for honoring and recognizing that. So I said a little bit about this last night, but I know some of you weren't here. So I just want to say that it's a really powerful moment for me to be back here with you all, because I started doing reproductive justice work about 15 years ago in the Deep South in Atlanta, Georgia, at a moment when reproductive justice was just starting to make its way onto the national stage. And at that time, reproductive justice was new and seemingly a fight at every freaking turn, not only within the Bible Belt in which I worked and organized, but also within the reproductive rights movement as well. And there was a time when reproductive justice was not a welcome term by many, and I really hope that that has started to change. So I also want to mention that it's a powerful moment to be here and be back in these spaces with you all after 15 years, because, you know, we are in a moment of, and I don't need to tell you all this, I know that it's preaching to the choir, but we are in a moment of overt, emboldened white supremacy and misogyny. We are in a moment of heightened surveillance, criminalization, and mass incarceration, the stealing of thousands of children before the eyes of the entire nation, right, when it's usually done hidden in plain sight, at a moment when the hatred of immigrants, black people, and Muslims are at a feverish pitch, when many of us are bracing for the overturn of Roe v. Wade, the Affordable Care Act, and Medicare. So this is a moment of resistance, I know that. But I want to say that when I was doing reproductive justice work, and, you know, I don't know if this is still the case, but it was at a time where the religious right was using Georgia as a place to practice some of the most harshest sentences, harshest policies that they had in the country. And they knew that it would pass. They knew that they could easily win there, and then they could use that win as a precedent as they push the same sweeping policies across the rest of the South as well as the Midwest. And let's never forget that the South and the Midwest have a lot of common stories and histories to share. I also want to say that it was a moment when the reproductive rights movement was being confronted with the need for intersectionality and expanding the messaging of the fight for reproductive freedom to include more and more communities. And I also hope that some of this has changed as well, that in the 15 years that I've been gone from the formal reproductive justice movement, that a lot of that has shifted too. But I remember sitting in rooms, sitting in workshops and national and local meetings on conference calls and things like that, summits and conferences, which, by the way, I still don't know what the difference between a summit and a conference is. Somebody needs to explain that to me at some point. Just as a side note. But again and again, I remember sitting in those rooms and sitting in those meetings, at national strategy meetings, and asking, what about disabled people? Where are the statistics on disabled women? what about ableism? Why isn't anyone talking about that? And this was at a time where nobody included ableism. Even in the laundry list of things that we say but we don't do, nobody even did that, right? And I know we have a long way to go still. And that was actually how a lot of my disability justice work started, was that people in the reproductive justice movement were like, well, we don't know. You go and talk about it. So I started talking about why disability and ableism and able supremacy were so important to understand when we do reproductive justice work. And it's beyond just the abortion and disability conflict that, that everybody talks about. And I just want to be clear, I am a disabled queer woman of color, and I absolutely support the right to abortion, and I also support the right for disabled people to live and not be deselected as fetuses. I think that those two things don't have to be in conflict. And so I feel like I was lucky enough to be one of the few voices at that time. I know it has grown since then, or I hope it has grown since then, that was really articulating why disabled people are so critical to this movement and this work. And after all, as I said last night, how can we talk about bodies without talking about disability? How can we talk about gender without talking about ability? And I would argue that many of our current understandings of gender are based so deeply in ableist and colonized notions of gender. Even in our most radicalized spaces, they still are. For many people, it's not about what bathroom they choose to go to. They don't get to choose when they go to the bathroom, right? They don't get to choose what kind of hairstyle they have or how they stand or sit. Like, how are we rethinking about what gender even means? Because I believe that gender is actually way more powerful and more magnificent than what we have sequestered it to be. And I want to say unequivocally, I feel like I always have to say this, and someday I hope I don't have to say it, and hope that we are in a better place around our fight against ableism. I want to say unequivocally that as a disabled queer woman of color, there is no reproductive justice without disabled people, period. That is never going to happen. And there is no liberation without ending ableism and abled supremacy. And I'm not only talking about accessibility. Yes, access is fundamental. It is incredibly important, no doubt about that. And we can hold more than one thing at the same time. We must move beyond only access, because disabled people's liberation cannot be boiled down to just logistics. Are you kidding me? Ableism is a part of all of our struggles and gets used against all of our communities. It is a critical part of reproductive oppression. What do you think happens to body, minds, hearts, and spirits that are living under oppression and surveillance? What do you think happens to body, minds living through generational cycles of violence and trauma? Living through state violence and intimate and sexual violence. Bodies that are denied access to health care, clean air, food, and water. That are forced to work in dangerous working conditions, that are harassed and shamed and blamed and told that we're ugly or perverse and undesirable at every single term. That have our children taken away from us, whether by murder, death, separation, poverty, famine, or incarceration. That live every day wondering if they will be able to pay their bills or afford to feed their children. What do you think happens to those body, minds, hearts, and spirits? The days of forgetting about disabled people, they are over. This is so 15 years ago, people. The days of pretending like disability and ableism don't impact all of us are over. Because if anything is true, it is that we are all aging, we are all living in violent, toxic, and polluted conditions. Every single person on the planet should be invested, deeply invested, in how disabled people are treated, and dismantling ableism and abled supremacy. Disabled people, especially disabled people of color, for those of you in this room and those of you out there on the live stream, we are one of the largest oppressed groups on the planet. And our numbers are only going to continue to grow. And for disabled people of color here and out there, I also want you to know, do not let anybody tell you that disability is not as important as race, or that race is not as important as disability, or that we have to wait to talk about gender. Again, we can hold more than one thing at the same time. Our literal survival depends on it. So I want to shift gears for a second, and I want to end this by talking about building alternatives. And that is building alternatives to our current systems. And as I said before, I know that we are in a moment of incredible resistance. And resistance is vital. I want to be clear that I'm not saying that we should not resist. We have to resist the current violent and dangerous practices and policies and culture that we are surrounded by every single day. That is essential. I'm not saying that it's not important. What I'm saying is that it is not enough, and that it is a different type of work than building alternatives. That's what I'm saying. Resisting the systems that we don't want is different than building the world that we do want. How do we resist against the world that we don't want and build the world we do? Put another way, knowing what we don't want is different than knowing what we do want. I want to make an argument and a plea for building alternatives here. We need more people willing to build off-the-grid structures. And I know the resistance work is like the sexy work that everybody wants to do. They want to be at the protests. They want to be the righteous activists who are telling off the man. I know all those things. Like, that's real. And we can do both at the same time as well. And I also want to remind us that if we, for example, if we want to live in a world without prisons and police and the criminal legal system, we are going to need to build the community infrastructure that will be able to hold that. It is not enough just to shut down prisons and end the police state. And by the way, I am not in favor and trying to work for nicer police. I am working for no police, right? So how do we build the community infrastructure that we need to be able to do this, to be able to build the world that we actually long and ache for? Because the state will not protect us. No matter what it says, no matter how much it tries to brainwash us that it will not. And I want to be clear, I'm also not saying that we should let the state off the hook. Yes, we need to hold the state accountable, for sure. That is crucial work. I think of reform work as harm reduction work. We need to practice harm reduction, for sure, because so many of our people don't have the luxury or the privilege to not be part of the state or bound up with the state. They're in the burning house. Pushing for things like policy changes and services, all of that will help our folks, definitely. We need to reduce the harm that our people face inside and at the hands of the state. Yes, I believe in that. And, again, both and, that will take time. And in the meantime, there will continue to be millions and millions of people who will fall through the cracks, who are falling through the cracks. How are we building structures that can catch them? How are we doing that? People who will never come in contact with the state. People who are living their lives off the grid already. Because a lot of those people, they are our people. How do we not only resist, again, how do we not only resist against the world that we don't want, but how do we also build the world that we do want? And what is it that we want? I want us to get better at naming and describing in concrete details, as concrete as you can. What is it that you want? You, every single person in this room. If somebody came to you right now and said, okay, yeah, everything is completely fucked up. Can I curse here? Oh, too bad. Everything is completely fucked up. And you're right. You're right. We should do something totally different. What should we do? Do you know what you would tell them? What are you working for, not against? If we got hold of the national treasury, what would we do with it? If you got hold of the Ford Foundation's money, what would you do with it? Do you know? Could you describe it to somebody and explain it to somebody? We are so good, too good, in fact, about naming what we don't want and naming what's wrong. I think we need to get better at naming what we do want. When I'm leading community accountability processes in my transformative justice work, I often ask people, what would justice look like? And remember, we're working outside of courts and police and prisons and other systems. So I ask you all, what would justice look like? For every single one of you, for all of your communities that you're working with, for your families, for times that you've been wronged, for times that you've wronged somebody else, what would justice look like? One of the things that I think transformative justice has to offer us and all of our movements is our work around accountability. And remember that questions about accountability are inevitably questions about justice. And questions about justice are inevitably questions about accountability. Every time we ask for justice around something, we're inevitably asking for accountability. What does that mean? Because if we can't even figure out what accountability and justice look like between each other on a micro level, how are we going to demand it from the state and from other institutions? How are we going to understand and start to define justice outside of courts, outside of convictions, outside of prison sentences? If we don't want prisons, we need to stop defining justice that way. We have to build, is what I'm saying. We have to resist and build. Because if we don't know what we want to build, we will be resisting forever and ever, and more of us will continue to burn out. And we will continue to play defense for the rest of our lives. I'm tired of that. I want us to lead with a clear vision. We need more builders. We need more people who are willing to build the alternative and renegade solutions that we so desperately need. So I would ask all of you here, what are you building? What are the concrete things that you're building in service of liberation? What are the political risks that we are willing to take to start building the things and the world that we want right now? I want people to channel the Jane Collective, to channel the Black Panthers, to channel Freedom University in Georgia. And if you don't know about them, you should look them up. They just started to educate undocumented immigrants just by themselves. Channel the groups that didn't wait for permission and started to create what they needed with what they had. The groups that started to make the world that they needed on their own terms, who were unapologetically bold and clear about implementing their visions for justice and liberation. The groups that saw a need and took it upon themselves to fill it with courage and a strong moral compass. Because if the law is immoral, then we do not need to abide by it. And for many of us, the law, the courts, and the government have never protected our people, and they never will. And in fact, it has been clear that for many of us, our people have needed protection from the law, the courts, and the government. And I know that what I'm saying is scary. I am not here pretending that it is easy. The risks are going to be incredible, right? We are going to have to do a kind of work that maybe we haven't been faced with before. But I also want to remind you, do not be afraid of fear. Learn from it, make friends with it, and use it. Fear can be a powerful tool for us. It can be a compass that can help to show us and point us in the direction of what we need to tackle next and where our work should be next. As Audre Lorde reminds us, we can learn to work and speak when we are afraid in the same way that we have learned to work and speak when we are tired. Be bold. You don't need money or a nonprofit to do amazing work. You need good people, strong values, and a willingness to start. Remember that most of the structures that currently exist, they were never built for us in the first place. We keep tweaking things that were never built for us and are never going to work for us. I want us to think and dream beyond the nonprofit industrial complex. Because most of the successful movements that we admire and revere and still look back upon today, they happened without nonprofits, without funders and funding. Never forget that. So I want to leave you with this quote from Alice Walker that says, "Look closely at the present you are constructing. It should look like the future you are dreaming." Let's build something that's worth our freedom, that's worth the next generation's freedom. Thank you all very much for having me. Thank you. Thank you.
What did I say? I hope you're all fired up and ready to fight. Thank you. You know, it reminds me so many times that, you know, while I work for the nonprofit industrial complex, I get up every morning trying to figure out a day where I don't have to. And if you engage in this work that we call social justice, that should be your dream. Your dream should be to work yourself out of a job, not to create more jobs, but to work so that you wake up in the morning and feel free. Free to be who you are, free to love who you love, free to move around without borders and without limits. Policies are things that protect us retroactively. I dream of a world where the Bird Shepherd Act is not necessary. I wake up every morning as a gender non-conforming Latina butch dyke and try to figure out, why is there a law where my wife will have added recourse because I was hurt in the streets for being who I am and for exercising my freedom to move as I should in this world, for not conforming to a definition of femininity that forgets my femaleness. There should be no such law. We should invest in education and in the work so that all of us in this room can exercise our freedoms, sexual or otherwise, to be who we are, to go where we want to live as we shall. That is fundamental human rights. That is the mission of Woodhull. That is why we're here today, and that is why we support the work as board, as supporters, and as participants of this summit. Please leave this plenary today, not just with the wisdom that Mia has imparted in all of us, but with a deep wish to make it so, to make it true. Go learn. Go do. And when tired, remember that you are not the only one spearheading this. There are others. Look around you. This is your family. This is your community. Again, on behalf of Woodhull, its board and its staff, I thank you for being here. Go learn things. Make us proud. Have a great rest of the day, and I'll see you tomorrow for brunch.